Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, and the dreams that you twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
The small town was known for its quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and one old school that stood at the center of the community. Every family hoped their children would study there because it had a strong reputation for academics and music. Students who performed well often earned scholarships that changed their lives. For many children, the school was more than a place to learn. It was a place where dreams either began or quietly faded away. Among those students was a 14-year-old girl named Anaya. She lived with her mother and younger brother in a tiny rented house on the edge of town. Life had never been easy for their family. Her mother worked long hours sewing clothes for local customers. Some weeks there was enough money to pay every bill. Other weeks they had to count every coin before buying groceries. Even though money was always short, the house was filled with kindness. Her mother never allowed difficult days to steal their hope. She often smiled and said, "A good heart and hard work can open doors that money never can." Anaya remembered those words every single day. Ever since she was very young, music had become part of her life. She had never owned a real piano. In fact, she had never even imagined having one. The first time she touched piano keys was inside an old community center where an instrument had been donated many years before. Several keys no longer worked properly. The wooden surface was scratched, and the sound was not perfect. Still, to Anaya, it felt like the most beautiful piano in the world. Whenever the center was empty, she quietly practiced for as long as she could. Sometimes she stayed until the caretaker locked the building for the evening. She watched free lessons whenever she found them. She listened carefully to every piece of music she could hear. She replayed melodies in her mind while walking home from school. Little by little, her fingers learned where to move. Every mistake became another lesson. Nobody forced her to practice. Nobody reminded her. She simply loved music. Years passed, and although no one outside her family knew how much she had improved, music became the one place where she felt completely confident. At school, however, very few people noticed her. She was quiet in class. She never tried to be the center of attention. Her school uniform had been carefully repaired many times by her mother. While other students talked about expensive phones, vacations, and new clothes, Anaya stayed focused on her studies. Some classmates respected her. Others ignored her. A few believed that students from poor families should never dream too big. One Monday morning, the entire school gathered for the weekly assembly. Teachers stood near the stage while students filled the hall with excited conversations. After everyone settled down, the headmistress walked onto the stage. She was known for being strict. Her rules were followed without question. She believed only the strongest students deserved recognition. Many children respected her position, but very few felt comfortable speaking to her. She announced that the school would hold a special piano audition. The winner would perform at the regional music celebration only a few weeks later. More importantly, several music organizations would attend the event looking for young talent. Outstanding performers could receive scholarships and advanced music training. The announcement filled the hall with excitement. Students whispered to one another, "I heard the judges come from famous music schools. My parents already hired another piano teacher. I've been practicing for months." Everyone seemed eager to participate. Everyone except Anaya. She remained silent while listening carefully. Her heart beat faster. This opportunity was everything she had secretly hoped for. She knew it would be difficult. She knew people would doubt her. But she also knew she would regret staying silent. After the assembly ended, students rushed toward the music office to collect audition forms. The hallway became crowded. Several confident students laughed as they discussed which songs they planned to perform. Anaya quietly joined the line. When it became her turn, she reached for one of the forms. Just then, the headmistress happened to walk past. She looked at Anaya, then glanced at the paper in her hands. "You?" she asked with a small laugh. The hallway suddenly became quiet. Several students stopped walking. Anaya nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." The headmistress folded her arms. I didn't know you played the piano. I do. The answer was calm. The headmistress smiled, but it was not a kind smile. These auditions are very competitive. I understand. They are meant for students with proper musical training. Anaya remained respectful. I would still like to try. A few students exchanged amused looks. Someone quietly laughed. The headmistress shook her head. There is a difference between liking music and being prepared to perform in front of professional judges. The words were not loud, but they were sharp enough for everyone nearby to hear. Anaya felt her face grow warm. Still, she held the audition form tightly. I've been practicing for a long time. The headmistress gave a short laugh. Practice alone does not create excellence. More students gathered around. Some watched silently. Others smiled as if expecting something entertaining. One boy whispered, "She'll probably quit before audition day." Another student replied, "Maybe she doesn't know how difficult it is." Anaya heard every word. She wished she hadn't. The headmistress finally stepped aside. "If you insist on entering, that's your decision." She paused for a moment before adding another sentence. "Just don't expect miracles." Then she walked away. The hallway slowly became noisy again. Students continued talking, but many glanced back at Anaya. Some looked sorry for her. Others seemed amused. Without saying another word, Anaya signed the form. Her hands shook slightly, but her signature remained clear. She handed the paper to the music office. The teacher sitting behind the desk accepted it with a gentle smile. "I'm glad you're participating," the teacher said quietly. Those simple words meant more than Anaya expected. She smiled for the first time that morning. "Thank you." As she walked home after school, the conversation kept repeating in her mind. She wondered if everyone else believed the headmistress. For a moment, doubt began to grow inside her. Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe she had dreamed too much. Maybe everyone was right. She walked slowly through the neighborhood until she reached the community center. The building was nearly empty. The old piano stood exactly where it always had. She gently lifted the cover and touched the worn keys. The familiar sound filled the quiet room. As soon as she began playing, her worries slowly disappeared. The music reminded her why she had started. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She wasn't playing for applause. She played because every note made her feel alive. The caretaker quietly walked past the room. He stopped for a moment and listened. Without interrupting, he smiled and continued his work. When Anaya finally finished, evening sunlight was shining through the windows. She packed her notebook and walked home. Her mother was preparing a simple dinner. The smell of fresh bread filled the small kitchen. "You look tired," her mother said. "A long day." Anaya sat down and hesitated. Then she shared everything. She described the announcement, the scholarship, the audition, the laughter, the words spoken by the headmistress. For a few seconds, the room became quiet. Her younger brother looked at her with concern. Their mother reached across the table and gently held her hand. "Did you sign up?" "Yes." Her mother smiled proudly. "Then you've already done something brave." "But everyone thinks I'll fail." Her mother shook her head. "People often judge what they don't understand. What if they're right? Then you'll learn something. And if they're wrong?" Her mother's smile became even warmer. "Then your music will answer for you." Those words stayed in Anaya's heart. That night she opened her notebook. Instead of writing about the laughter, she made a simple practice schedule. Every morning before school, every afternoon after homework, every evening until dinner, she promised herself one thing. No matter what anyone believed, she would walk into that audition fully prepared. Outside, the town slowly grew quiet as lights appeared in the windows of nearby homes. Inside the small house, while everyone else slept, Anaya looked once more at the folded audition notice resting beside her books. She knew the coming days would not be easy. There would be whispers. There would be doubt. There might even be more laughter. But none of those things could stop her hands from reaching the piano keys. For the first time since the announcement, fear no longer felt stronger than hope. She quietly whispered to herself, I'll let the music speak. Then she closed her notebook, turned off the light, and prepared for the days that would test not only her talent, but also her courage. The days after the audition announcement seemed to move both quickly and slowly for Anaya. Every morning she woke up before the sun had fully risen. The town was still quiet when she left home with her school bag over one shoulder and a small notebook filled with music notes in her hand. While most students were still asleep, she was already walking toward the community center, hoping to spend at least 30 minutes with the old piano before school began. The caretaker had noticed her routine long ago. Every morning he unlocked the building a little earlier than usual without saying much. He never asked questions or expected anything in return. He simply smiled whenever she thanked him. "You are here again," he said one morning. Anaya smiled. "I want to make every day count." The caretaker nodded. "Then don't waste a single minute worrying about what people say." Those simple words stayed with her as she sat down at the piano. The instrument still had broken keys, and one pedal barely worked, but she knew every little problem it had. She had learned how to adjust her hands without letting the missing notes interrupt the music. It was not perfect, but neither was life. When she finished practicing, she rushed to school before the first bell rang. The excitement about the upcoming audition had spread through every classroom. Students talked about nothing else during lunch breaks. Some had hired private music teachers. Others practiced on expensive grand pianos at home. A few even argued about which classical pieces would impress the judges the most. Anaya rarely joined those conversations. She quietly listened while finishing her homework or reading in the library. Some students barely noticed her. Others still remembered the headmistress laughing at her in the hallway. Whenever she walked past them, she could hear whispers. "She really thinks she has a chance. I heard she practices on an old piano. That isn't enough. I wonder how long she'll last." Each comment hurt a little. Still, she kept walking. She had started realizing something important. Every minute spent answering people was 1 minute she could have spent practicing instead. One afternoon, during music class, the teacher asked every student to write down why they loved music. Most students finished quickly. Some wrote about winning competitions. Some wrote about becoming famous. Others talked about making their parents proud. Anaya looked at her paper for a long time before writing just one sentence. "Music helps me say things that words never can." When the teacher collected the papers, she quietly paused after reading Anaya's answer. She looked across the classroom but said nothing. At the end of the lesson, she asked Anaya to stay behind for a moment. The classroom slowly emptied. The teacher closed the door and smiled kindly. "I've heard you signed up for the audition." "Yes. You've been practicing for a long time, haven't you?" Anaya nodded. "Since I was little." The teacher looked thoughtful. "I've seen many students enter competitions because they wanted attention. You don't seem like that. I just want one chance." The teacher smiled. "Sometimes one honest chance is all someone needs." She walked over to a cabinet and unlocked it. Inside were several old music books. They're not new, but they still have valuable lessons. She handed 2 books to Anaya. "You can borrow these." Anaya looked surprised. "Really? Of course. Thank you. Return them whenever you're finished." That afternoon, Anaya carried the books home as if they were precious treasures. She carefully covered them with paper to keep them clean. Every evening after finishing her homework, she studied the pages one by one. Some lessons were difficult. Others introduced techniques she had never learned before. She practiced each one slowly until her hands understood. Days turned into weeks. Her fingers became faster. More importantly, they became calmer. She stopped trying to impress imaginary judges. Instead, she focused on making every note meaningful. Meanwhile, the school became even busier. Audition posters appeared on bulletin boards. Teachers reminded students about rehearsal schedules. Parents discussed the event outside the school gates. Everyone seemed excited. Everyone except the headmistress. Whenever she noticed Anaya carrying music books, she simply looked away. She never encouraged her. She never asked about her progress. One afternoon, while students were leaving school, The headmistress stopped near the entrance where several children were standing. She noticed Anaya walking by with her music books. "So," she said loudly enough for others to hear, "you're still preparing?" "Yes, ma'am. You certainly have confidence." "I'm just practicing." The headmistress gave a small smile. "I hope you understand that auditions are judged by skill, not determination." Several nearby students looked at Anaya, waiting for her response. She remained polite. "I understand." The headmistress nodded. "Good." Then she continued walking. The students slowly followed. One girl quietly stepped beside Anaya after everyone else had gone. "I don't think she should talk to you like that." Anaya smiled softly. "It's all right." "No, it isn't." The girl hesitated before speaking again. "I've heard you practicing once." "You did?" "Yes. You play beautifully." For a moment, Anaya didn't know what to say. After so many negative comments, those few kind words felt almost unbelievable. "Thank you." The girl smiled before hurrying home. That evening, Anaya practiced harder than ever. Not because someone praised her, but because she realized there were people quietly cheering for her. She simply hadn't noticed them before. At home, life remained simple. Her mother continued sewing late into the night. Sometimes the sound of the sewing machine mixed with the soft melodies Anaya practiced on a paper keyboard she had drawn herself. Since the community center closed in the evenings, she had created life-sized piano keys on cardboard. She placed them on the floor and silently practiced finger movements without making a sound. Her younger brother often watched with curiosity. "Does that really help?" She laughed. "A little. It doesn't even make music. The music is already in my head." He smiled. "I hope one day you get a real piano." "So do I." Their mother looked up from her sewing. "You will." Neither child answered. They knew how impossible that dream sounded. Still, hearing her believe in it made the room feel warmer. A few days later, the community center announced that it would close early for repairs. Anaya felt disappointed. Losing practice time worried her. The caretaker noticed her expression. "I know you're concerned. I don't know where I'll practice." He thought for a moment. "Come tomorrow afternoon. But the building will be closed. I'll leave one room open for an hour." "You don't have to do that." He smiled. "I know. But I want to." She thanked him several times. The following afternoon, she found the room unlocked just as he had promised. The old piano waited quietly in the corner. She sat down and practiced with complete focus. Outside, workers repaired windows and painted walls. Inside, every note carried a little more confidence than the day before. As she finished, she noticed someone standing quietly near the doorway. It was the music teacher. She had apparently stopped by the center after school. "I didn't want to interrupt," she said. "I didn't know anyone was listening." The teacher smiled. "I've listened long enough." Anaya became nervous. "Was it all right?" The teacher nodded slowly. "You don't play like someone trying to show off." She paused. "You play like someone telling a story." Those words touched Anaya deeply. The teacher continued. "Remember that during the audition. What if I get nervous?" "You probably will." "What if I make a mistake?" The teacher smiled gently. "Everyone makes mistakes. The audience rarely remembers one wrong note. They always remember honest music." Anaya nodded quietly. She repeated those words to herself all the way home. The audition was now less than 1 week away. Students became more competitive. Practice rooms at school stayed full. Some children argued over who deserved more rehearsal time. Others boasted about difficult songs they planned to perform. Anaya stayed away from those conversations. She had discovered that comparing herself to others only made her lose confidence. Instead, she focused on becoming better than she had been yesterday. Every evening she marked another completed practice session in her notebook. Small check marks slowly filled the pages. Looking at them reminded her that success was built one day at a time. On the final Friday before the audition, she stood outside the school after classes ended. The wind gently moved the leaves across the playground. Students hurried home. Teachers locked classrooms. The building slowly became quiet. Anaya looked toward the music hall where the audition would soon take place. For a moment, she imagined herself walking onto that stage. She imagined the bright lights, the rows of chairs, the judges, the students, the headmistress watching from the front. Her heart began beating faster. Fear returned for a brief moment. Then she remembered her mother's words. A good heart and hard work can open doors that money never can. She remembered the caretaker opening the building early every morning. She remembered the teacher lending her books and believing in her. She remembered the girl who quietly said, "You play beautifully." Little by little, those memories became stronger than the fear. She took a slow breath. No matter what happened on audition day, she had already proven something important to herself. She had refused to let other people's opinions decide her future. With quiet determination, she picked up her school bag, smiled to herself, and walked home, ready for the biggest day of her young life. The morning of the audition arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. Anaya woke up before her alarm rang. She had hardly slept because her mind kept thinking about the day ahead. Every note she had practiced over the past few weeks seemed to play again in her thoughts. She sat quietly on the edge of her bed for a few minutes before standing up. Her mother was already awake in the small kitchen, preparing breakfast. "You should eat something," her mother said with a gentle smile. "I'm not very hungry." "I know. But today you'll need your strength." Anaya nodded and slowly ate a few bites. Her younger brother looked at her with excitement. "You're going to do great," he said. She smiled. "I'll do my best." "That's enough," her mother replied. "The rest will take care of itself." Before leaving, her mother carefully straightened the collar of her school uniform. The uniform was old but perfectly clean. Every button was in place. Every wrinkle had been pressed out the night before. Her mother looked into her eyes. "No matter what happens today, never forget who you are." Anaya hugged her tightly. "I won't." The walk to school felt different that morning. Usually, she noticed the birds singing or the shopkeepers opening their stores. Today, everything seemed quieter. She was focused only on the audition. As she reached the school gate, she saw groups of students talking excitedly. Some were carrying music books. Some were moving their fingers in the air, silently practicing. Others looked nervous even though they tried to hide it. Large signs had been placed around the school. "Piano audition today." Parents, teachers, and invited guests slowly began entering the music hall. The event was much bigger than Anaya had imagined. Inside the hall, rows of chairs were neatly arranged. Fresh flowers decorated the stage. Bright lights shone over the grand piano standing proudly in the center. It was the most beautiful piano Anaya had ever seen. For a moment, she simply stared at it. She had dreamed of playing an instrument like that for years. Now she would finally have the chance. The contestants gathered in a waiting room beside the stage. Some quietly reviewed sheet music. Others stretched their fingers. One student confidently spoke about winning several competitions. "My teacher says the judges will love my performance." Another replied proudly, "My family invited relatives from another town just to watch." Anaya sat quietly in a corner. She closed her eyes and took slow breaths. She remembered the old piano at the community center. She remembered every early morning, every broken key, every evening spent practicing on the paper keyboard. Those memories calmed her. The music teacher entered the room. She smiled warmly at all the students. "You've all worked hard to reach this day." The room became silent. "Remember something important. This audition is not about proving you're better than someone else. It's about sharing your love for music." Several students nodded. As the teacher walked past Anaya, she quietly whispered, "Play from your heart." Anaya smiled. "I will." Soon the auditions began. One by one, students walked onto the stage. Some performed confidently. Some became nervous and made small mistakes. The audience applauded every performance politely. The judges carefully wrote notes after each student finished. Anaya waited patiently. Each passing minute made her heart beat a little faster. Finally, only a few contestants remained. Outside the waiting room, she could hear applause after another performance ended. Then the assistant opened the door. Next, another student walked onto the stage. While waiting, Anaya quietly looked through a small window. She noticed the headmistress sitting in the front row beside the guest judges. Her expression remained serious. She spoke quietly with one of the judges while reviewing the list of contestants. A few moments later, another round of applause echoed through the hall. The assistant returned once again. She looked down at her list. Anaya. For one brief second, time seemed to stop. She stood up. Her hands felt cold. She quietly thanked the assistant and walked toward the stage entrance. As she reached the curtain, she heard voices from inside the hall. The announcer spoke clearly. Our next performer is Anaya. Some students recognized the name immediately. Whispers spread across the audience. Isn't she the girl everyone was talking about? The one who practices at the community center? I heard she's never had professional lessons. The whispers grew louder. The headmistress looked toward the stage entrance. Before Anaya stepped forward, the headmistress leaned slightly toward the microphone placed on the judge's table. She smiled politely, but her words carried a hint of sarcasm. It's always encouraging to see students willing to participate. A few people smiled. She continued, sometimes confidence brings students to the stage even before experience does. Several students quietly laughed. Not everyone joined them. Some teachers looked uncomfortable. The music teacher lowered her eyes, clearly disappointed by the remark. Anaya heard every word from behind the curtain. For a moment, her feet refused to move. Her heart pounded loudly. She wondered if she should turn around. Maybe everyone expected her to fail. Maybe walking away would save her from embarrassment. Then she remembered something. She remembered the caretaker unlocking the community center every morning. She remembered her mother's tired hands sewing late into the night. She remembered her brother proudly saying, "You're going to do great." She had not come this far just to walk away. She quietly took one deep breath. Then she stepped onto the stage. The lights felt brighter than she expected. Hundreds of eyes looked toward her. Some faces were curious. Some looked doubtful. A few smiled kindly. She walked slowly toward the grand piano. Each step echoed through the silent hall. When she reached the piano bench, she stopped for a moment. She gently placed one hand on the smooth wooden surface. The piano felt completely different from the old instrument she practiced on every day. Its keys were perfectly polished. The sound would be clear and powerful. For a brief moment, she smiled. She quietly adjusted the bench and sat down. The hall remained silent. One of the judges looked at her application. He seemed surprised by something written there. He whispered to another judge. They both looked back at Anaya with interest. The headmistress folded her arms confidently. She appeared certain about what would happen next. Anaya placed both hands gently above the keys. She did not rush. She closed her eyes for one short moment. Everything around her slowly disappeared. The audience, the lights, the whispers, the pressure. In her mind, she was back inside the quiet community center. The old piano stood before her. Sunlight entered through the dusty windows. The caretaker smiled as he unlocked the door. Her mother encouraged her. Her brother clapped after every practice session. Those memories filled her heart with peace. She slowly opened her eyes. Her breathing became steady. Across the hall, even the restless students had stopped moving. No one spoke. Everyone waited. The music teacher quietly folded her hands together, hoping Anaya would believe in herself. The judges lifted their pens, ready to write their first notes. The headmistress leaned back in her chair with a confident expression, expecting an ordinary performance that would quickly prove her earlier opinion. But Anaya was no longer thinking about proving anyone wrong. She was thinking only about the music she had carried inside her heart for years. Her fingers rested gently on the keys. A deep silence filled every corner of the hall. Then, with complete calmness, she pressed the very first note. The first note floated gently through the music hall. It was soft, clear, and full of feeling. The sound reached every corner of the room before slowly fading away. No one moved. The audience had expected a nervous beginning, but instead they heard confidence wrapped in calmness. Then came the second note. The third. Within a few seconds, the simple melody began to grow into something beautiful. Anaya's fingers moved naturally across the piano keys. There was no sign of panic. There was no rush to impress anyone. Every note seemed to have its own purpose, as if it was telling part of a story. The whispers that had filled the hall only moments earlier disappeared completely. Students who had been sitting carelessly in their chairs slowly leaned forward. Parents stopped looking at their phones. Even the teachers sitting near the back looked at one another with surprise. The music sounded warm and honest. It did not feel like someone trying to win a competition. It felt like someone sharing a part of her life. One of the guest judges quietly lowered his pen. He had planned to take notes from the very beginning, but instead he found himself simply listening. Beside him, another judge smiled without realizing it. The headmistress remained still. Her confident expression began to fade. She had expected mistakes during the first few seconds. Instead, she heard balance, control, and emotion. Anaya continued playing without looking toward the audience. Her eyes stayed on the piano. Every practice session inside the old community center had prepared her for this moment. She remembered learning to ignore broken keys. She remembered practicing even when the building became cold during winter mornings. She remembered repeating difficult passages over and over until her fingers finally understood. All those quiet mornings had become part of her performance. The audience could not see those memories, but somehow they could feel them. The melody slowly became stronger. It rose like sunlight after a long night. The room seemed to breathe together with the music. An elderly guest sitting near the middle row quietly wiped his eyes. His wife gently held his hand. Neither of them spoke. A young student who had laughed at Anaya only days before looked down at the floor. He remembered every unkind comment he had made. Now he wished he could take those words back. The music teacher watched proudly. She smiled, not because Anaya was proving someone wrong, but because she was finally showing everyone the person she had quietly become through years of hard work. Every difficult day, every sacrifice, every hour of practice, they were all speaking through the music. Halfway through the performance, the piece became more energetic. Anaya's hands moved confidently across the keyboard. Her fingers danced with remarkable precision. The grand piano responded beautifully. The sound filled the hall without becoming too loud. It was powerful but never harsh. Several parents exchanged surprised glances. One whispered softly, "Who taught her?" Another quietly answered, "I don't know. I've never heard her play before." Near the front row, one judge leaned toward another. "Did you read her application?" "Yes. It says she never had formal piano lessons." The other judge looked back at the stage. "That's difficult to believe." The first judge nodded slowly. "Yet here she is." The headmistress heard their conversation. For the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared on her face. She looked carefully at Anaya. The quiet girl she had dismissed now looked completely different. She looked confident, focused, peaceful. Not because she believed she was better than anyone else. Because she belonged there. The realization made the headmistress uncomfortable. She remembered laughing in the hallway. She remembered telling Anaya not to expect miracles. Those words echoed in her own mind now. Meanwhile, Anaya continued playing. She was no longer aware of the audience. She forgot about the judges. She forgot about the competition. The music carried her somewhere else. She imagined sitting once again at the old piano in the community center. The broken keys were gone. The missing notes no longer mattered. Everything she had dreamed about felt possible. Her confidence continued growing with every measure. The melody softened once more. It became quiet and gentle. The room remained completely silent. No one coughed. No one whispered. Even the smallest children sitting with their parents seemed to understand that something special was happening. The caretaker from the community center had quietly entered the hall earlier that morning. He stood near the back because every seat had already been taken. A smile slowly spread across his face. He remembered unlocking the building before sunrise. He remembered hearing the same determination every single morning. Watching Anaya now felt like watching one of his own dreams come true. He folded his arms and listened proudly. Nearby, the music teacher noticed him. Their eyes met briefly. Neither needed to say anything. Both knew how much effort had brought Anaya to this stage. The performance entered its final section. The melody became brighter, carried hope, carried courage, carried gratitude. Each note seemed to say thank you to everyone who had believed in her when almost nobody else did. Several audience members smiled through tears. One little girl sitting beside her father whispered, "I want to learn the piano too." Her father quietly nodded. "You can." The guest judges continued listening without writing. One of them finally spoke in a whisper. "This is why we organize auditions." The others agreed. "We're not just looking for skill. We're looking for heart." As the final moments approached, Anaya slowed the music naturally. Nothing felt forced. Every ending note had space to breathe. She gently lifted one hand before placing it back on the keys for the final phrase. The hall became so quiet that even the sound of the piano pedals could be heard. Then came the final chord. It rang beautifully across the room. Anaya held it for a moment. Then she slowly lifted her hands from the keyboard. Silence. Complete silence. For 2 or 3 long seconds, no one moved. The audience almost seemed frozen. Many were still processing what they had just heard. Anaya quietly stood from the piano bench. She bowed politely. The silence continued. She wondered if something had gone wrong. Then suddenly, one pair of hands began clapping. It was the elderly man sitting in the middle row. A second person joined him. Then another. Within moments, the entire hall erupted into applause. The sound grew louder and louder. Students stood from their seats. Parents rose to their feet. Teachers smiled as they applauded with genuine pride. The standing ovation spread across the room until almost everyone was standing. The applause refused to stop. Anaya looked up in surprise. She had never experienced anything like it. She placed one hand over her heart and bowed once again. The music teacher applauded with tears in her eyes. The caretaker clapped harder than anyone else. Several students who had once laughed at Anaya now cheered with sincere admiration. The guest judges stood as well. One of them smiled warmly and nodded toward her. It was a silent way of saying, "Well done." Only one person remained seated. The headmistress. She looked around the hall as applause continued all around her. Every face showed admiration. Every expression reflected the same surprise. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she stood up too. She began clapping. Her applause was quieter than everyone else's, but inside her heart something much louder had begun. For the first time, she understood that she had judged a student by appearance instead of ability. She had mistaken quietness for weakness. She had confused poverty with lack of talent. Standing there among hundreds of applauding people, she realized her biggest mistake had not been underestimating Anaya's music. It had been failing to see the determined, hard-working young person who had been standing in front of her all along. As the applause slowly settled, Anaya walked away from the piano with calm steps. She did not celebrate wildly. She did not look proudly toward those who had doubted her. She simply smiled with quiet gratitude. Deep inside, she knew something important had already happened. Whether she won the audition or not, she had found her voice. And this time, the entire hall had listened. The applause continued long after Anaya stepped away from the piano. She stood quietly near the side of the stage, still trying to understand what had just happened. Only a few minutes earlier, she had walked onto the stage carrying the weight of other people's doubts. Now the entire hall had risen to its feet. She looked toward the audience and noticed familiar faces. Her music teacher was smiling with tears in her eyes. The caretaker from the community center gave her a proud thumbs up from the back of the hall. Several students who had once whispered about her now looked at her with respect instead of doubt. Anaya smiled politely and waited for the applause to settle. The announcer thanked everyone for their support and asked the audience to remain seated while the judges completed their discussions. All of the contestants were invited back to the waiting room. The atmosphere inside the room had completely changed. Earlier that morning, everyone had been busy talking about themselves. Now the room was unusually quiet. Some students looked thoughtful. Others sat silently, replaying the performances in their minds. As Anaya entered, several contestants looked up. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then one girl walked over to her with a gentle smile. "You played beautifully." "Thank you," Anaya replied. Another student nodded. "I've never heard anyone play like that. I really enjoyed your performance." One by one, more contestants offered kind words. They were no longer looking at her old uniform or wondering where she came from. They were simply speaking to another young musician. That meant more to Anaya than she could explain. She thanked each person with the same quiet smile. A few minutes later, the music teacher entered the room. She looked at every contestant before speaking. "You should all be proud of yourselves." She paused. "It takes courage to perform in front of so many people." Everyone listened carefully. "The results matter, of course. But never let one competition decide your worth." The students nodded. The teacher's eyes briefly met Anaya's. There was no need for extra words. Her smile said everything. Outside the waiting room, the judges remained seated around a large table. Sheets of paper were spread before them. They carefully compared notes from each performance. One judge spoke first. "We've heard many talented students today." The others agreed. Another judge added, "Several performances were technically excellent." He looked toward Anaya's application. "But one performance stayed with me." The oldest judge smiled. "The girl who taught herself." He gently tapped the paper. "Listen to what is written here." He read aloud. "Practiced on an old community piano. No private lessons. Limited access to instruments." The judges looked at one another. One quietly shook his head in amazement. "She achieved all of this without professional training." Another judge added, "And she never tried to impress us. She simply shared music." The oldest judge smiled. "That is exactly why her performance felt so honest." Across the room, the headmistress remained silent. She had listened to every comment. None of the judges spoke about expensive lessons. None of them mentioned family background. Not one person cared about the condition of Anaya's school uniform. They only spoke about dedication, feeling, and character. The headmistress slowly lowered her eyes. For the first time in many years, she questioned her own judgment. She remembered every conversation she had shared with Anaya. She remembered laughing in the hallway. She remembered telling her not to expect miracles. Now those memories felt heavy. After several more minutes, the judges reached their decision. The announcer returned to the stage. Students, parents, and teachers took their seats once again. The hall quickly became quiet. The announcer smiled warmly. "Thank you all for your wonderful performances today." He spoke about the effort every student had shown. He reminded everyone that music was not only about competition but also about sharing emotions. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. "The judges have made their decision." The room became completely silent. Contestants stood together near the stage. Some held each other's hands nervously. Anaya simply took a slow breath. Whatever happened next, she already felt grateful. The announcer continued. "This year's scholarship recipient and representative for the regional music celebration is..." He paused. "Anaya." For one brief second, she thought she had imagined hearing her own name. The audience immediately burst into applause once again. Her classmates smiled. Several teachers stood to clap. Her music teacher closed her eyes for a moment before smiling proudly. The caretaker laughed happily from the back of the hall. Anaya remained frozen. One of the teachers gently whispered, "Go." She slowly walked toward the stage. The applause continued as she accepted the certificate. One of the guest judges handed it to her with a warm smile. "You earned this." She quietly replied, "Thank you." The judge continued softly, "Never stop playing." "I won't." After presenting the award, the announcer invited the headmistress to say a few words. The hall became quiet again. The headmistress slowly walked toward the microphone. She stood silently for several moments before speaking. Her voice was calm, very different from the confident tone she had used before the audition. "Today," she began, "I learned an important lesson." The audience listened carefully. As educators, we should encourage students before we judge them. She looked toward Anaya. "I failed to do that." The room remained completely still. The headmistress took another breath. "I underestimated someone because I believed I already knew what talent should look like." She paused. "I was wrong." Many teachers exchanged surprised looks. It was rare to hear someone in such a respected position admit a mistake publicly. The headmistress continued, "Hard work, patience, and determination deserve respect, no matter where they come from." She turned fully toward Anaya. "I owe you an apology." Anaya looked surprised. "I'm sorry for discouraging you." The hall remained silent. Everyone waited to see how Anaya would respond. She slowly stepped closer to the microphone. She smiled gently. "Thank you." The audience waited. She continued quietly. "I never wanted to prove anyone wrong. I only wanted one chance." Her simple answer touched everyone in the room. There was no anger, no bitterness, no desire for revenge, only honesty. The audience applauded once again. After the ceremony ended, people gathered throughout the hall. Parents congratulated their children. Teachers spoke with the guest judges. Students took photographs together. Many people approached Anaya. Some wanted to congratulate her. Others simply wanted to shake her hand. A younger student stopped in front of her. "I've always wanted to learn the piano." Anaya smiled. "You should. But we don't have one at home." She remembered her own childhood. "You can still learn." The little girl looked hopeful. "Really?" "Yes. Start wherever you can." The child smiled brightly before running back to her parents. Nearby, the caretaker slowly walked over. He looked at the certificate in Anaya's hands. "I think the old piano at the community center will be very proud today." Anaya laughed. "It deserves this award more than I do." He smiled. "No. It simply waited. You were the one who kept coming back every morning." Her eyes became watery. "Thank you for opening the building early. It wasn't difficult. It changed everything." The caretaker gently shook his head. "You changed everything." A few minutes later, the music teacher joined them. She looked at Anaya proudly. "I believe those old music books belong to you now." Anaya quickly replied, "No, I'll return them." The teacher smiled. "I was hoping you would say that." She laughed softly. "But keep them a little longer. I think you'll need them for your next performance." As everyone slowly left the school, the afternoon sun filled the courtyard with warm light. Students who had once ignored Anaya now walked beside her, asking questions about music and practice. Some admitted they had judged her too quickly. Others simply wanted to become her friend. Anaya answered every question kindly. She never reminded anyone of their earlier laughter. She never tried to embarrass those who had doubted her. She understood something important. Winning a competition was wonderful. Winning people's respect through kindness was even greater. As she walked home carrying the certificate carefully in her hands, she looked up at the clear sky. She smiled quietly. The scholarship was a dream come true. But the greatest reward was knowing that years of quiet effort, patience, and hope had finally been seen. For the first time in a long while, she no longer felt invisible. Her music had introduced the world to the person she had always been inside. The morning after the audition felt different, but Anaya was still the same person. She woke up before sunrise, folded her blanket, helped her mother prepare breakfast, and packed her school bag. The certificate she had received the previous day rested carefully inside a simple folder on the table. Her younger brother looked at it every few minutes as if he still could not believe it was real. "You should take it to school today," he said with a big smile. Anaya laughed softly. "I think everyone already knows. They'll want to see it again." Her mother placed warm bread on the table and smiled. "I'm more proud of the way you treated people than the award itself." Anaya looked at her. "You mean after the headmistress apologized?" Her mother nodded. "It is easy to be kind when everyone supports you." She paused for a moment. It takes real strength to stay kind after someone has hurt your feelings. Those words stayed with Anaya as she walked toward school. The town looked the same as always. Shopkeepers opened their stores. Children hurried along the sidewalks. Birds rested on the electric wires. Yet somehow everything felt brighter. As she reached the school gate, several students waved to her. "Good morning, Anaya. Congratulations. You were amazing yesterday." She smiled and thanked each of them. Only a week earlier, many of these students had walked past without noticing her. Now they greeted her warmly. The sudden attention felt strange, but she reminded herself not to let it change who she was. Inside the school building, teachers were also smiling. One teacher stopped her in the hallway. "The judges called this morning. They were very impressed." Anaya listened quietly. "They want you to perform at the regional music celebration next month." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes." They also asked if the school would continue supporting your musical education. Before Anaya could answer, the teacher smiled. "I think that answer will be yes." When she entered her classroom, her classmates welcomed her with applause. Someone had written, "Congratulations, Anaya," on the classroom board. She felt her face turn red. "You didn't have to do this," she said. One student smiled. "We wanted to." Another added, "You made all of us proud." The lesson began, but many students kept looking at her with admiration. During the break, several younger children gathered around her desk. "How long have you been playing? Were you nervous? How did you learn without a teacher?" Anaya answered every question patiently. "I practiced a little every day. I made mistakes. I kept trying. I never stopped learning." The younger students listened carefully. One little boy looked worried. "I started learning music last month. I'm not very good." Anaya smiled kindly. "No one is very good on the first day." He looked relieved. "So I should keep practicing?" "Yes. Every small step matters." The boy grinned before running back to his friends. Later that morning, a message arrived asking Anaya to visit the headmistress's office after class. Some students exchanged nervous looks. "Why would she call you?" "I don't know," Anaya answered honestly. When classes ended, she walked quietly toward the office. She knocked gently. "Come in." The headmistress was standing beside the window. This time, her expression looked calm instead of proud. She invited Anaya to sit down. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, the headmistress broke the silence. "I've been thinking about yesterday." Anaya listened respectfully. "I have worked in education for many years. I always believed I could recognize talent." She looked down for a moment. "But yesterday reminded me that talent is not always easy to see." She sighed softly. "I judged you before giving you a chance. I am truly sorry." Anaya smiled gently. "Thank you." The headmistress looked surprised. "You've already forgiven me? I don't want to carry anger with me." Those simple words filled the room with silence. The headmistress nodded slowly. "I hope you never lose that kindness." She opened a drawer and removed a small key. "This is the key to the school's practice room." Anaya looked surprised. "The piano there is available every morning before classes." She placed the key on the desk. "You no longer need to search for a place to practice." Anaya carefully picked it up. "Thank you very much. I hope many students will one day follow your example." As Anaya left the office, she felt something had changed inside the school. Not just for herself, for everyone. Over the next several weeks, preparations began for the regional music celebration. The music teacher worked closely with Anaya, helping her choose pieces that suited her style. She never tried to change the way Anaya played. Instead, she encouraged her to keep expressing genuine feeling through every note. "You already have your own voice," the teacher said. "My job is simply to help you strengthen it." Every morning, Anaya unlocked the practice room using the key the headmistress had given her. The piano was beautiful. Still, before touching the keys, she always remembered the old piano at the community center. She never forgot where her journey had started. One Saturday afternoon, she decided to visit the community center. The caretaker was sweeping the entrance when he saw her. "I had a feeling you'd come," she smiled. "I wanted to say thank you again." He laughed. "I think you've thanked me enough." She walked over to the old piano. The scratches were still there. Some keys still needed repair. She gently placed her fingers on them. The familiar sound filled the room. "It still feels like home," she whispered. The caretaker nodded. "It always will." After playing for a few minutes, she noticed several neighborhood children standing quietly at the doorway. One little girl asked shyly, "Can we listen?" "Of course." The children sat on the floor while Anaya played a simple melody. When she finished, they clapped happily. One boy raised his hand. "Can anyone learn to play?" Anaya smiled. "Yes. Even if we don't have a piano?" She looked at the old instrument. "I started right here." The children looked at one another with excitement. From that day forward, every Saturday afternoon, Anaya spent a few hours showing neighborhood children the basics of music. She did not call herself a teacher. She simply shared what others had once shared with her. Word slowly spread through the town. Parents appreciated her kindness. The community center became busier than it had been in years. Some local volunteers even collected enough money to repair the old piano. When the repairs were finally finished, everyone gathered to hear the first performance. The caretaker smiled proudly. "It finally sounds the way it should." Anaya looked at the shining keys. So many people made this possible. A few weeks later, the regional music celebration arrived. The hall was much larger than the school auditorium. Contestants came from many different towns. Some had studied music for years. Others dreamed of becoming professional musicians. Anaya felt nervous again. But this time, the nervous feeling did not frighten her. She knew what to do. Take a deep breath. Remember why she loved music. Play from the heart. When she finished her performance, the audience applauded warmly. She did not win every prize that day. Some musicians were older. Some had far more experience. Yet she returned home smiling. She had discovered something much more valuable than a trophy. She belonged in the world of music. Months passed. The scholarship allowed her to continue learning from experienced teachers. Her skills continued improving. But everyone who met her noticed something even more important. She remained humble. She still thanked every person who helped her. She still greeted the caretaker with the same warm smile. She still visited the community center. She still encouraged children who doubted themselves. Back at school, the headmistress introduced a new rule before every audition. No student should ever be judged before being heard. Teachers welcomed the change. Students felt more confident applying for activities they had once been afraid to try. The atmosphere slowly became kinder. Years later, many people remembered Anaya's performance. Some remembered the beautiful music. Some remembered the standing ovation. Others remembered the headmistress's apology. But those who knew Anaya best remembered something different. They remembered the quiet girl who practiced before sunrise on an old piano with broken keys. They remembered the student who answered cruelty with kindness. They remembered the young musician who believed that every person deserved one honest chance. Whenever someone asked Anaya what had helped her succeed, she always gave the same simple answer. "I was never alone. My mother believed in me. My brother cheered for me. My teacher guided me. The caretaker opened the door every morning. And music never gave up on me." She never spoke about being special. She never called herself gifted. She believed that dreams grew stronger when people refused to quit. Her story became a quiet reminder throughout the town that talent can be found anywhere. Hope can grow in the hardest places, and kindness often leaves a greater mark than success itself. And every time her fingers touched a piano, whether it was on a grand stage or inside the old community center, she remembered the promise she had whispered to herself on the night before the audition. "I'll let the music speak." It always did.